Upadesa Saram, Essence of Teachings, offered by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Verses 26 to 30. Atma samsthiti swatma darshanam atma nirdvayad atma nishtata. Since there are no two selves for one to know the other, to be one's real self is to know and have the vision of one's real self. This is called the state of absolutely abiding in one's real self. Explanation for this verse is as follows. The supreme, infinite, immortal, blissful self exists and shines by itself. In it, the ego, the I thought, appears as a ripple in this absolutely tranquil, serene self. It immediately identifies with a body and through the senses sees the universe. Thus, it sees objects other than oneself and it sees them as separate from itself. But in fact, this I thought is a phantom and has no real existence. It hides deep within and causes a multitude of thoughts to arise, which are in turn manifested as the universe. And until one realizes this truth and inquires deeply within about the origin of this I thought, this demon, the ghost, continues to give trouble. Regarding this unreality of the ego and that it is a phantom, Maharishi gives several clear examples and explains them during one of his conversations. Here is the first one. Uncertainties, doubts, and fears are natural to everyone until the self is realized. They are inseparable from the ego. Rather, they are the ego. Then, how are they to disappear? Well, they are the ego. If the ego goes, they go with it. The ego is itself unreal. What is the ego then? It is something intermediate between the inert body and the self. It has no locus standi, firm standing. If sought for, it vanishes like a ghost. You see, a man imagines that there is something by his side, a ghost. If he looks closely, the ghost is not there, but some dark object which he could identify as a tree, a post, and so on. But if he does not look closely, the ghost strikes terror in the person. All that is required is only to look closely, and the ghost vanishes. The ghost was never there. So also with the ego. It is an intangible link between the body and pure consciousness. It is not real. So long as one does not look closely, it continues to give trouble. But when one looks for it, it is found not to exist. Here is the second example that Maharishi used to explain the unreality of the ego. A stranger was mistaken to be an important man in a wedding, both by the bride's party and the bridegroom's party. So he was treated with special privileges, and the stranger thoroughly enjoyed himself. But then one day, someone started inquiring about him. As soon as the stranger found out about this, he took flight. So it is with the ego. If looked for, it disappears. If not, it continues to give trouble. How it is to be looked for is learnt from those who have already done so. That is the reason why the Master is approached. Here is the third explanation that Maharishi offered in this regard. Some men asked the Maharishi some questions that basically amounted to this problem. They said that the I is not perceptible however much they struggle. The Master's reply was as follows: Who is it that says that I is not perceptible? Are there two I's in the same person? It is the mind which says that I is not perceptible. Where does that mind come from? Know the mind, you will find it to be a myth. King Janaka said, I have discovered the thief who has been ruining me and robbing me of my I-ness for so long. I will now deal with him summarily, then I shall be happy. Thus, through these examples, Maharishi teaches how to get rid of the ego and realize the self through self-enquiry. Following these teachings from Ramana Maharshi, when one inquires deeply within about the origin of this I thought, and when that alone is held, it vanishes, leaving the ever-existent, true, blissful being shining by itself. In this verse, Maharishi asserts that since the ego is unreal, and since there are no two selves for one to know the other, and since there is only one self, then to be one's real self is to know and have the vision of one's real self. He further states that this is called the state of absolutely abiding in one's real self. Jnana varjita, jnana hina chit, jnana mastikim, jnatu mantaram. That knowledge is real knowledge which transcends both knowledge and ignorance. This is the truth, for there is nothing there to know. Explanation for this verse is as follows. The word knowledge in English, when it is used to mean jnana, does not fully convey the meaning of jnana. Jnana is not just intellectual knowledge, but it is the spiritual feeling of the realization of one's true self. Therefore, jnana, knowledge indicated here, is realization of the self. And when one is caught in the snares of the ego, and so does not know the self, it is called ignorance. In the previous verse, Maharishi said that since there are no two selves for one to know the other, to be one's real self is to know and have the vision of one's real self. And this is called the state of absolutely abiding in one's real self. In this verse, Maharishi says that the supreme reality is beyond even jnana, knowledge, because to know something, there has to be a subject and an object. On the contrary, the supreme reality is just pure being that shines and exists as it is by itself. In it, there is neither a subject nor an object. It is as it is. So, it is not only beyond ignorance, but beyond knowledge too. Therefore, Maharishi declares in this verse that true knowledge is only that knowledge which transcends both knowledge and ignorance. He adds that this is the truth because in the self there is nothing to know. It is as it is, just pure being. In this regard, the following teaching offered by Maharishi to a visitor may clarify this further for you. How to know the I? The I is always there. There is no knowing it. It is not a new knowledge acquired. What is new and not here and now will be evanescent only. The I is always there. There is obstruction to its knowledge, and it is called ignorance. Remove the ignorance, and knowledge shines forth. In fact, this ignorance, or even knowledge, is not for Atman, the self. They are only overgrowths to be cleared off. That is why Atman is said to be beyond knowledge and ignorance. It remains as it naturally is. That's all. Kim Swarupamit Atma Darshane Avyayabhava Purnachit Sukham. When one realizes and has the vision of what one's true nature is, then one exists as that imperishable, unchanging being, which is of the nature of perfect awareness and bliss. Explanation for this verse is as follows. So far, Ramana Maharshi has dealt with the topics of the ego and the self, ignorance and knowledge, how to get rid of the ego and realize one's real self, and how to abide as that perfect, immortal, imperishable, blissful being. In this verse, Maharishi continues in the same strain of realizing and abiding as the real self. He asserts firmly, based on his own experience, that when one realizes and has the vision of what one's true nature is, then one exists as that imperishable, unchanging being, which is of the nature of perfect awareness and bliss. Bandha mukhyatitam param sukham vindatiha ji vastu daivika. Abiding firmly in the state of supreme bliss, beyond bondage and liberation, is found to be the state which is living in the service of the Divine Supreme. Explanation for this verse is as follows. Many meanings, definitions, and explanations have been given for the term service to God, the Divine Supreme. Various rituals and methods of serving God have been declared and followed. So, when Maharishi emphasizes the importance of self-realization and abidance in it, the following question may arise. Is realizing the self and abiding in it contradictory to offering service to God? Here, in this verse, Maharishi clarifies the matter. He asserts that when one abides firmly in the state of supreme bliss, that is beyond bondage and liberation, then that state will be found to be the same as abiding in the service of God, the Divine Supreme. Aham apetakam nija vibhanakam mahadidam tapo Ramana Vagiyam. Free from the ego I, Realizing one's real self and abiding in it is the greatest tapas, penance. This is the true teaching of Ramana, the self that pervades in all. Explanation for this verse is as follows. In the previous verse, Maharishi proclaimed that when one realizes oneself and abides in it, that state will be found to be the same as abiding in the service of God, Divine Supreme. In this verse, Maharishi removes all doubts for seekers who wonder about doing penance too. He declares emphatically that when one becomes free from the ego, the I thought, through dispassion and deep self-enquiry, realizes the real self and abides in it, then that is the greatest penance, tapas, that one can perform. Maharishi adds that this sums up his true teaching. Ramana Maharshi also makes an amazing revelation in this verse. He says that this is the true teaching of Ramana, instead of saying, "This is my teaching." The meaning of the word Ramana is the self that pervades in all. By this, he reveals his transcendental nature. It also reveals the fact that he is indeed the pure, eternal, infinite, blissful being that has appeared with a divine name and form only to save the souls of sincere devotees, guide them both from within and without, help them to realize the real self, and firmly abide as pure being consciousness bliss. Here concludes Upadesa Saram offered by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi.